Hello and welcome to part 2 of our cybersecurity webinar series with BottleIT. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us. Before we get started, I want to remind you all that this webinar is being recorded, and we will send up a follow-up email tomorrow that's going to include the recording, the slide deck, as well as HRCI and SHRM recertification credit for attending. Additionally, feel free to submit any questions during the webinar, and we will do our best to address them. We hope that you can join us for part 3 of our cybersecurity webinar series, which will be hosted on Wednesday, May 24th. And now I would like to welcome John Hensberger, President of Black Bottle IT, and Mark Young, CEO at myHRcounsel.
Very good. Well, thanks, Dan, and thanks, everyone. John, especially, we're becoming better and better friends and better partners as we're working through some of this and we were telling war stories and such. And John's even out with a client, putting together some policies for insurance, and that takes me back to the 37 pages we had to fill out too, and went, some of this language I'm not even sure about, so we probably don't have it in place, but we probably do, and so on. If you were with us for the first webinar a week and a half ago or so, we talked about policies. It was probably a little heavier on what are some of the things that you need to have in place. Again, policy documents, more of the sort of the housekeeping, paper, if you would, that you need as sort of the foundation to the house. Today, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the realities of, what are the things that are happening and that trigger the hacking and the cyber, security breaches, the things that happen, and what are some of the learnings John and his team have had on things that you need to do. Sort of, what do you do first? And we would all like to be able to have a see Jane run and do step 1, step 2, step 3. Well, that's not usually how it happens. Usually there's an email or there's something's not working, and people start reaching out to each other. Hey, is this working for you? Is this broken for you? What's going on? And all of a sudden you find out something bad happened. We're either got hit with ransomware, or there's now a bug that I need to hopefully call my BottleIT representative to say, how do I fix this, in the next 10 minutes? Because, of course, we're getting emails and, now all of a sudden, my friends and the consultants that are out in the field, it's all these different things are happening. And for those of us that have gone through this for our own businesses, it all seems to just happen like a complete, just you didn't see the wave coming kind of thing, and it just smacked you. John, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, there's a couple phases of a cybersecurity program. One is to be able to identify all the all of the things in your environment that need protected, right? So you need to figure out all of your IT assets, whether it's workstations, whether it's software, whether it's accounts to the cloud-based software. All of those things, in most environments, there's probably some things that people don't have their eyes on, because maybe they don't know they exist, or they're not on any kind of they're not on any kind of inventory list of assets. So that would be the first thing, is to identify what needs protected. The second thing is to have some sort of plan in place and have tools and people and expertise to be able to monitor those assets for any sort of cybersecurity anomalies. And then the third is when you do see an anomaly or you do get an alert, well, then you have to have somebody or some expertise to be able to identify, is that alert credible? And if so, well, then how do I respond? And I think those are the kind of the broad brush big things that are part of any kind of cybersecurity program. And there's a lot of details in all that stuff, and it takes some, some people have a good handle on maybe like identifying assets and tools, but then what happens when there is an event? How do I respond? Some people don't have any of it. So I mean, it just, it just depends on like your maturity maybe in your cybersecurity program, and do you have expertise in-house or not, which frankly, I mean, like not everybody has cybersecurity expertise in-house, because if you read any kind of statistic about the cybersecurity expertise now in this country, we're at this like deficit that like will never be made up kind of thing, right? I mean, there is a deficit of cybersecurity talent that is like pretty massive. So ergo, that's why, people like us exist, right? Because well, then people will outsource and we'll help them with their cybersecurity. So it's not uncommon for a like small to mid-sized business to not have expertise in-house. So like in general, like, those are kind of the beats about a security program, and we'll probably go through some examples as we go through the slides.
Great. Well, one of the things we talked about again last time was, one of the highest, probably the highest reason that, there is the hacking that happens, the ransomware, et cetera, is, employees that are clicking, sending things to their personal emails, et cetera, personal, their phones, their equipment, and everything else. And but in general, broadly, I want to do this poll and kind of kick this off with: have you ever clicked on a phishing email? PH phishing. I think phishing opener in Minnesota, where we are, starts on Mother's Day this coming weekend. So this is a different phishing. So let's vote on this. All right.
Yes.
So
Okay.
that's pretty good, wouldn't you say, John? That 2/3
Yeah.
have not clicked on.
Yeah. I mean, like I think like the low hanging fruit here is, like educating, staff and employees on what to look for phishing emails. And, the bad guys are getting better at making them look like legitimate. I mean, it used to be, you could look at it and tell it's probably not legitimate because of email address, because of language used, because of all of these things that you could just look at it visually and say, probably not a good one. Well, they're getting better. And so like they're starting to look better and better. And I think the question to ask there is like, what happens if you do click on it? And what happens if you do enter the credential that they're asking for? And then after you do that, you go, oh no, maybe I shouldn't have done that. So like, what's the next step there, right? And I think that there are some good responses, and then there's some not so good ones. So I think that, I think the good response is to, to have an environment in your company that says, look, like I made a mistake and I'm going to contact my IT department or whoever my IT person is, company, and say, I did this and here's exactly what I did, and then give them enough details so that they understand, and then they can go and investigate potential problems, and then maybe come up with some like remediation, or maybe in advance they might do something like proactive just to make sure that nothing happens. That would be the ideal response, versus maybe like the not so good response would be, well, I'm afraid I'm going to get into trouble, so I'm not going to say anything. And then in another month, well, then those account credentials that are that were gotten, well, then they're using an attack in some way, and there's emails going out from that account that's not you. And so like then it escalates into a giant event that now affect customers, potentially clients, third-party vendors, and that whole 9 yards. So, like I think that the answer there is to, like tell somebody who is in your chain of command that like that you did something that you probably shouldn't have done, and then just let them do their thing and be able to like analyze what happened. Now, like maybe it could be that maybe people don't know who to contact. That's another problem that we see, is that there is no plan, there's no communication to the organization that says, when an event happens, when I see something suspicious, when I do something maybe I shouldn't have done, well then who do I call? that's a big problem because people go, do I call the IT person? Do I call, I mean, there's a lot of different like veins that could go down in a company. So I think that having that communication to employees saying like, this is clearly what needs to happen if these things happen is really important to making sure that we know, that we understand, and that the proper people can get involved to do their investigation. And
Yeah, that's great.
yeah, and like I think it's kind of what it says on that slide there is also, there's also like the training is really important too, because even though everybody knows what a phishing email is by now, I'm sure, and everybody gets this training and don't click on it. And if it, I mean, all of that is good, but it needs to be constantly reinforced with whatever the new thing is that the people are trying to do to entice you to put in those credentials. And every day they're changing and they're getting a little bit better, like a little bit different. And so I know that everybody knows what a phishing email was at one point, but that's maybe not what a phishing email is now from somebody's lens. And like, so then I think that training, that constant reminder of like what is being done and like, so what people are trying to do to entice you to put credentials in is really important. So.
Right. Yeah, and I'll just put a shout out for HR in general. You know, one of the things that I think it's gotten a lot better probably since the time I got into the industry where if something like this had happened when we had an IT bug or a crash or whatever, and generally your first contact with the organization is the HR person that hired you, that got a hold of you. And that a lot of times in small, medium, and large companies becomes your sort of go-to person because you're comfortable. Where do I go? That's kind of the directory. I've been at organizations where if you went to the HR person, they'd say, that's not my job, go talk to IT. And then you hear things like, well, HR is not invited to the table, and how would I know? I have all this compliance stuff and these legal issues. You fired someone, why didn't you come to me first? In HR, I could have told you not to do that. Well, here's a perfect thing that is sort of out of the realm of HR, when you think about IT and that, and yet it is your system, it is your ecosystem for the company, and it is run, and used by human resources in your organization. So there's no better place to sort of stay up to date, keep reading on different IT things. You see the fascinating stories in that. If you're in HR, I'd stick with that. And I'd also be the one to kind of raise my hand to say, I'd like to do more training on this. Or I'd like to be the one that sends out some updates on, hey, look out for this email, so that you are one, at the table, but two, you're kind of a go-to person, to your point, John, so that the organization, if somebody clicks on a button, no one likes to admit, why'd you click on the button? But the fastest way to get to this and get through this is to, just admit it and move on. And HR is a great place to have that there, to build the policies, but then also to sort of execute the operational side of that. So let's move to the next question. John, you want to explain that one?
Yeah, so basically, like if you haven't experienced like multi-factor yet, you will, and it's basically taking the step of like logging into any system or application, and it's adding another layer up like onto it. So typically you'll get a text message on your phone, you'll have an app that has an authenticator code, and you put in the number. Sometimes it's email, that you'll get an email saying they put in this code that I'm going to email to you. So it's just another layer just to make sure that so it's meant to like make the password not the only way that you can get into a system or software. And it's a pain, and so it adds very good. So like more yeses than nos. And it's a pain because it adds another layer of complexity onto getting into like systems to do your day jobs. It is a pain, but it's kind of like the reality of the world that we live in today. Like insurance companies that have cyber insurance are like requiring the MFA on Email accounts, for example, is one popular choice. The other choice is anybody in your organization that has a like privileged account that has admin access to anything or has access to sensitive information like HR records and things like that. I mean, so that's a requirement with most of those insurance questionnaires. I mean, like if you're lucky, maybe you have to answer 1 or 2 questions about MFA. If you're not lucky and your carrier is pretty diligent, you might have to answer 10 questions on MFA and then provide evidence about, how you're doing it and, software tools that you might be using to, like implement and so forth. So, I mean, like MFA is a big thing now. I mean, we get a lot of, we get a lot of companies that are doing insurance questionnaires, for example, and they say, hey, so my insurance questionnaire runs out tomorrow and I need to answer this box. Yes, how do I implement MFA? Now, sometimes that's easy, depending upon their architecture and depending upon where their stuff is and all that. Sometimes it's not, and it could be a project. You might have to bring in other third parties. So it just depends. I mean, like the scope of those things can vary, just depend upon your IT architecture. But that's one popular thing. I mean, that's why I'm at the client today, is because of this exact situation, is that they have an insurance questionnaire and they need this MFA installed like as soon as possible. And we're trying to get them up and running by the end of the week so that they can answer yes to the question, and then their coverage will continue and they don't have any lapse in coverage. So, I mean, like you're probably going to get a lot of insurance things that are probably going to hit your organization if that's your role, about like different cybersecurity tools in place, and it's only going to get more and more as time goes on, because I could go into a whole nother thing about insurance, the landscape, the carriers, the losses, all that, but but that's a reality of the situation. So, and then like to go to the slide is that I mean, like the MFA. So, like best practice is that MFA is turned on by default for everything that has that capability, right? And like sometimes your system software, but they don't have an MFA option, right? I mean, it's only just, username, password. So like in those cases, I would go back to your vendor and ask them what's their timeline for implementing MFA, because they're all going to do it or have to do it. And so like at some point your organization is going to get asked, do you have MFA for everything? And if you can't answer that yes, well then your insurance, or maybe there's a compliance requirement in your industry that like, I mean, that's going to be an issue at some point in the near future. So that would be one thing. Segregated backups is another thing to talk about because in the case of like ransomware, I mean, like you want to make sure that those backups are not part of your network proper, so that if you do have a ransomware attack, that you have those backups in a safe place so that you can restore back to the point before ransomware, if you don't want to pay the ransom, which I never recommend you do. And just a side note about ransomware is that there are countries, I think like the UK, made it outlawed a private business to be able to pay ransomware, if I'm right. So I don't even think they're able to pay in some respects in some countries. I know that the state of Florida put in a requirement that says that if you are receiving any kind of state funding, that like you are not able to pay any ransomware under any circumstance if you receive state funding. So like there is this wave of like, don't pay the ransom, because then they'll stop doing it. And so I think that's a really good like movement that's kind of starting to gain traction. However, though, like a business has to make a decision. I'm down, I don't have backups, maybe I pay the ransom, I cross my fingers and I'm up, or I deal with the pain. So I mean, there's a business decision that people have to make about whether they want to roll the dice and pay the ransom or not. And but I mean, like I think that movement of not paying is going to gain some steam in the months and years to come.
Yeah.
And then, and then some of those other bullet points we've already touched about, the cybersecurity training program, and so like the last bullet on there about like third-party vendors is really important. So, most of us have very important third-party vendors that we are like relying on to some degree. And some of those third-party vendors have access to like your sensitive data to some degree. And if they do, well, then I would highly recommend that you vet them a little bit before you engage, or maybe you are engaged for a while and now you want to vet them. And I mean, ask them about their cybersecurity program, because most people who like most people that have a good cybersecurity program will have some marketing document to show it off because they're proud of it, and like they'll give you whatever you ask for. You know, it's the people that don't want to show you that I would ask more questions, because they may have it, they just might not have enough to give you, and it's a little bit harder for them to get it. But then there are some people that don't have what's, you know, like what they should have, and then that puts you at risk because you have your sensitive data flowing through them, and then that puts you at risk because if they have an event, well, then you have an event, and then it creates a cascading effect. So that's a really important thing that people, I don't like, so I don't think the companies do like enough of vetting third parties hard enough. So because like we find that you would just, you know, I mean, like people make assumptions like, well, you know, they're a software provider, so they have all the cybersecurity things they should have. That is not necessarily the case. So
That's great. So, and for those of you that are on and are clients of myHRcounsel, two questions I get. One, especially if we're integrated with some of the HCM platforms, is why do I have to log in each time to myHRcounsel, and why don't you do a single sign-on through the system? There's two reasons. One is exactly what John was talking about, is to have that extra layer. This is attorney-client privileged. It's confidential information. It can't be even disclosed in court on a subpoena. And so, you know, that was one of the reasons. The other is for if there's partners on the phone or on the call, if we had single sign-on, they technically, the partner could be being considered giving that that attorney or legal advice, and would be, you know, violating the unauthorized practice of law. So, you know, I know when I'm logging into something and I have to, you know, again, bank or whatever it happens to be, and I have to, you know, do the MFA, and I think, you know, when I found out why and how much more that blocks the ransomware and the hacking, it's significant. And, you know, again, one of the things that we're kind of proud of is this, you know, when we had to think about, you know, how do you work around, you know, it would be really cool to have a single sign-on. You go into, you know, unfortunately like Kronos, and you can go right into, you know, talk to the lawyer without having to get out of the system or even click on a link. And, you know, Kronos got hit pretty hard, you know, at the end of 2022. And it took them months to get back up. You know, to John's point, in the organizations, for us, it was, we did have a backup that was, you know, the night before, and that's huge. You know, it's huge for all the email and all the data that you have, you know, on a day-to-day basis. So. Awesome. Dan, do we have any questions?
Yeah, we've got one question here. Do you have any type of checklist that an HR manager can use to evaluate cybersecurity readiness of third-party vendors? We don't know what criteria or best practices to look or ask for.
yes, I do. And so like we have a couple versions, and so we have a real daunting one, and we have a light one, and we have a middle one, and typically we use the middle one. It's about 30 questions long, and then it basically asks yes or no questions, you know, and like, so like if it's a no, then we typically will ask, well, okay, well, like why is it a no? Because maybe it's NA like out of scope or something to that effect. But yeah, I do. And if you want me to send that around, I definitely can send it to whoever asked it. Dan, if you pass that on, I can definitely send that along.
So John, another question I've had, or maybe a comment, is we're talking about, you know, having a cyber policy and everything else. And I heard somebody say, well, I'm not really worried about it. I have insurance. What would be your comment to that?
Well, so insurance, so, you know, like if you don't have a cyber policy direct, okay, so first off, I have to say, like, I'm not an insurance agent and I can't talk about insurance, so don't take what I say as law, because I think I have to say that. Anyway,
Very good.
you know, like from the legal perspective, right? But
Yeah.
you know, from my lens of insurance is that there, probably everybody has some sort of general liability policy that has some sort of maybe like cybersecurity like rider on it that's for X amount of dollars of coverage. And some people might think, well, it says cyber, I'm good. Well, typically those cyber riders are very narrow in scope, so they'll only cover like ransomware or something very narrow. And and also, they don't really give you like the limits that you would need to really respond to an event if you had one. And then, and then the third thing is that they don't really give you access to any kind of legal resources or forensics or any of that kind of stuff as part of a rider to a general liability policy. Now, if you have a cybersecurity policy proper, then you will get all of that stuff. Typically, you'll get access to resources, you'll get a higher limit, but you're going to get underwritten a little bit harder than you would for the general liability. So that's the trade-off. And I would also say that most of those things are so like depending upon your industry, okay, and depending upon how much sensitive data that you touch or have, then that's going to depend on how much it costs for your coverage. And because that's the higher the risk, the more dollars for coverage. And so for them, risk equals number of personal identifiable pieces of information that you manage or have access to. That's generally how they view the risk, which like may or may not be a good measure on risk. I mean, I don't really think it is from my lens, but that's a whole nother topic. And also, like most of them will put, like aggregate limits on there to say, hey, you're gonna get X amount of dollars for an incident, but we're gonna cap it at whatever, like $1 million or something like that. And again, like that might not be sufficient for your industry, right? So just for example, let's just say that you do credit card processing and you process money on behalf of people, and you process like 1,000 transactions a day, and you have an event, and then so like you lose all of those 1,000 people's information, like somebody steals them. Well, I mean, that's 1,000 different events you just had, okay? And then like you got to respond in kind to every one of those people individually or business, depending upon situation. And it gets to be daunting in terms of scope. It gets to be daunting in terms of how do I respond? Because let's say that all 50 of those people live in a different state. Well, then every state has their own rules about how you're supposed to respond if you lose data from somebody that lives in that state. So there's 50 different states to respond to, and it just kind of cascades from there. So even though like $1 million sounds like a lot, it's not. It's not at all when it comes to an event of any sort of size and meat. So.
Well, I know, like you said, the insurance, like think about insurance if you had a fire and you still need the plan of what you do while the fire is going on. For clients that we've had that have been hacked or that have called and said, we're being held ransom or whatever, what's in my agreements with my clients? What do I have to do? And I've even was in-house counsel, general counsel for a company where we had that happen, and we had clients in Europe. We had agreements that said, we had to let them know within 24 hours. Well, what do you let them know? It's a Saturday, and you let them know by that Monday, and then what do you want to say? Sometimes you won't know at that time what's going on. And so really having professionals, making sure that your agreements are up to date with your clients, that they're, in the 2023 timeframe and not 2018 or 2016. But then also, who are the people that are going to help me through this in terms of communication, PR, organization, all part of the plan. That is not part of insurance typically, and not going to be reimbursed necessarily. And you don't necessarily care. I mean, you got to get going. And so whether or not that's in your insurance policy doesn't mean that, you're going to be fine. Nothing wrong with the insurance, because again, every piece helps, but that's not what you're worried about at the time that that's all going on.
I agree with everything you said, and then I'll add one more thing on. I mean, it's always nice to have another voice that's not tied to the like insurance company's vendor list of who to help you respond to kind of bounce things off of, to say, well, okay, so I mean, like, you know, I mean, like, this is what they're recommending that I do. Is that right for my event and my incident based on like what you know? And it's always good to have another set of eyes there, because I think that I mean, you know, I mean, there's nothing bad against insurance companies and their vendors, but they, you know, but they kind of all have their agenda, right? To be honest, I mean, they all have their agenda, and so it's nice to kind of have somebody kind of sanity check that kind of stuff. I mean, you know, like, I mean, like, I went through an event in 2015. Maybe I said that the last time, I'm not sure, but and I didn't have anybody to bounce any of that stuff off of, because I was probably typical, you know, like IT director of a company, and I was doing all the things that that you're supposed to do, and so like we still had an event. And I didn't have anybody to like sanity check that. And there were like lots of people asking me to do lots of things, and I wasn't sure what the right thing to do was. And so like you really got to slow it down. Even though I know it, like, you know, you may think you need to act fast. I mean, there are some aspects of that, but you need to slow it down to just come up with some sane, rational ways to use resources that are like available to you in a way that makes sense for your event and your organization. Because I mean, you know, let's say somebody's recommended you spend $10 million to remediate your, you know, like
Right.
incident, and you're a $5 million top line company. Well, like, does that make sense? Because you'll be out of business anyway. So what's the point, right? So I mean, you have to really like kind of, you know, like sanity check some of that stuff, because I mean, because people are going to want you to move maybe faster than maybe you're ready to move, and without maybe some of the information that you need to gather before making some critical decisions along that incident response. So yeah, so I mean, it's always nice to have somebody to bounce it off of and call, or maybe even you know, I mean, like what we do for clients if they have an insurance policy is that we will act as that person, and then we'll also just kind of get them ready for what's coming in advance. And we'll say, okay, these are the beats that's going to happen. Like, you're going to have to call an attorney, and you're going to have to call a forensics company, and you're going to have to get all those other third parties involved. And like, so they're going to want to do all these things. And so like in your instance, it, you know, like it makes sense to do X, Y, Z from each one of those third parties, like based on the size and the scope of your event, right? Because, and then, well, like, and then also to the Mark's point is, you know, like there's a PR component that I don't think that the like insurance companies don't necessarily have that as part of their repertoire of people. I mean, typically, and like, so to have a third party like engage with you prior to having an event, and like having them be part of the plan so you can break glass and call them whenever you have an event, is a really good idea, because they will actually have canned responses already made for you if you plan in advance, so that you know what to say to clients, to employees. And then also, if you want them to, if it's a big event, it's public, it's on TV, I mean, like they'll actually get in front of the cameras, and like, so they'll actually talk on your behalf and like act as your spokesperson to communicate, like what's going on with events. So they're really valuable to have, like in my experience, they work a lot better when you plan it in advance and you have them already engaged and they've already kind of understand the beats, like when you have an event. So.
Great. Well, I think we've hit our half an hour. Dan, do you want to just give an update of what's coming next in part 3 of the series? You might be
Yeah,
on.
so on on Wednesday, May 24th, we'll be hosting part 3, and we'll continue to cover more on about vendors. The title of the webinar is "It's Time to Get Serious: How to Gain a Better Cyber Posture with Vendors."
Perfect. So we'll go into the details of an organization like John's and an organization like myHRcounsel. Why do you have those? Well, how can they help? Why are they your first and second calls? Those type of things, and answer more questions. So everyone, thank you again. Hope that this was valuable, and the second part of this, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.
All right, thanks everybody.